Okay, hello, welcome back. So this is our second book. This one is The Tale of Peter Rabbit. And it's written by an author called Beatrix Potter. It's quite an old-fashioned book, but Beatrix Potter wrote some lovely tales that involved lots and lots of different animals. Okay, she lived in a place called the Lake District, which is full of countryside. Okay, and that sort of inspired her tales. And there's lots and lots. And like I say, this one leads into another one called Benjamin Bunny. Okay, so I might read that at a later date. I'm just going to take the dust cover off this because it will make it easier for me to hold. Okay. It's still there. I've got my reading companions here and here. Make sure you've got your reading companions with you. Okay, here we go. Once upon a time, there were 4 little rabbits, and their names were Flopsy, Mopsy, Cottontail and Peter, and they lived with their mother in a sandbank underneath the roots of a big fir tree. "Now, my dears," said old Mrs. Rabbit one morning, "you may go into the fields or down the lane, but don't go into Mr. McGregor's garden. Your father had an accident there and was put into a pie by Mrs. McGregor." Oh dear. "Now run along and don't get into mischief. I'm going out." There she is, doing them up in their best clothes. Lovely illustrations in this book as well. Then old Mrs. Rabbit took a basket and her umbrella and went through the wood to the baker's. She brought a loaf of brown bread and 5 currant buns. Flopsy, Mopsy and Cottontail, who were good little bunnies, went down the lane to gather blackberries. But Peter, who was very naughty, ran straight away into Mr. McGregor's garden. He'd been told not to do that. And squeezed under the gate. And here he is, squeezing under the gate. Looks like it's a bit of a struggle for him there. Naughty, naughty. First he ate some lettuces and some French beans, and then he had some radishes. And then, feeling rather sick, he went to look for some parsley. But, round the end of a cucumber frame, whom should he meet but Mr. McGregor? What is Mr. McGregor going to do? Mr. McGregor was on his hands and knees planting out young cabbages, but he jumped up and ran after Peter, waving a rake and calling out, "Stop, thief!" Peter was most dreadfully frightened. He rushed all over the garden, for he'd forgotten the way back to the gate, and he lost one of his shoes among the cabbages, and the other shoe among the potatoes. After losing them, he ran on all 4 legs and went faster, so that I think he might have gotten away altogether had he not unfortunately run into a gooseberry net and got caught by the large buttons on his blue jacket. They were brass buttons and quite new. And there he is, getting all entangled. In the netting in Mr. McGregor's garden. Peter gave himself up for lost. He shed big tears, but his sobs were overheard by some friendly sparrows, who flew to him in great excitement and implored him to work harder and try and get himself out. Mr. McGregor came up with a sieve which he intended to pop on the top of Peter, but Peter wriggled out just in time, leaving his jacket behind him, and rushed into the tool shed and jumped into a can. It would have been a beautiful thing to hide in if it had not had so much water in it. Look at the can that he's chosen to hide in. Ooh. Dear, oh dear, poor Peter. Mr. McGregor was quite sure that Peter was somewhere in the tool shed, perhaps hidden underneath the flower pot. He began to turn them over carefully, looking under each one. Presently, Peter sneezed, "Achoo!" and Mr. McGregor was on him in an instant. He tried to put his foot upon Peter, who jumped out of the window, upsetting 3 plant pots. The window was too small for Mr. McGregor, and he was tired of running after Peter, so he went slowly back to his work. There's Peter jumping out of that window. A little bit. and knocking over the flower pots as he ran. Peter sat down to rest. He was out of breath and trembling with fright, and he had not the least idea which way to go. Also, he was very damp after having been sat in that can. After a time he began to wander about, not very fast, and looking all around. He found a door in a wall, but it was locked, and there was no room for a fat little rabbit to squeeze underneath. An old mouse was running in and out over the stone doorstep, carrying peas and beans to her family in the wood. Peter asked her which way to the gate, but she had such a large pea in her mouth that she could not answer. She only shook her head, and Peter began to cry. Then he tried to find his way straight across the garden, but he became more and more confused. And presently he came to the pond where Mr. McGregor filled his watering cans. A white cat was staring at some golden fish. She sat very, very still, but now and then the tip of her tail twitched as if she were alive. Peter thought it best to go away without speaking to her. He had heard about cats from his cousin, little Benjamin Bunny. Cat looks very concentrating on her food there. Ooh. He went back towards the tool shed, but suddenly, quite close to him, he heard a noise of a hoe. Screech! 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 Peter scuttled underneath the bushes. But presently, as nothing happened, he came out and climbed upon a wheelbarrow and peeped over. The first thing he saw was Mr. McGregor hoeing his onions, his back turned towards Peter, and beyond him was the gate that Peter was looking for. Peter got down very quietly from the wheelbarrow and started running as fast as he could go, along a straight walk behind some blackcurrant bushes. Mr. McGregor caught sight of him at the corner, but Peter did not care. He slipped under the gate and was safe at last in the wood outside the garden. Mr. McGregor hung up the little jacket and shoes for a scarecrow to frighten the blackbirds. And there they are. I don't think Peter's mum's going to be too happy at him for leaving those behind. He never stopped running or looked behind him until he got to the big fir tree. He was so tired that he flopped down upon the nice soft sand on the floor of the rabbit hole and shut his eyes. His mother was busy cooking. She wondered what on earth he'd done with his clothes. It was the second little jacket and pair of shoes that he'd lost in a fortnight. And I'm sorry to say that Peter was not very well during the evening. His mother put him to bed and made him some tea, and she gave a dose of it to Peter. 1 tablespoonful to be taken at bedtime. But Flopsy, Mopsy and Cottontail had bread and milk and blackberries for their supper. The end. So, lots of these stories have those little messages in them that if people are sensible, okay, then they may get better things or get treats as opposed to if they're naughty, okay. And Peter Rabbit in that book was a very naughty bunny and upset Mr. McGregor several times. So the next one I'll read is Benjamin Bunny, okay, which kind of follows on, and you meet Peter Rabbit in Benjamin Bunny as well. But take care for today, okay, and I will say have a good half-term break, whole week of chilling and relaxing like we would have done. Okay. Take care, speak to you soon.